Hello, Internet! Welcome to Wednesday's Serial. I'm doing it a little earlier this week because I won't be able to get to my normal stash till later because of unforeseen events. And then, what I'm trying to do today is look at some comics a bit differently. I have three comics to look at to kind of get at a more general point about comics. And what I'll be using for my points are Underground 5, which is published by Image, and then Forgetless 3, also published by Image, and then Mesmo's Delivery Service, which is a one-shot published by Dark Horse. So I'm going to kind of compare and contrast these so that you can kind of see some points that I'm trying to get at about indie comics. Alright, the first point that I want to get at between these three is how they each handle violence. And every comic in here has violence. Not saying that every comic ever has violence, but as a medium, it tends to lend itself to something more energetic, more visual, in a very explosive, single-paneled manner, if you will. Something that you can have as an image, but not necessarily need to have motion for, clearly, because it's a comic. And so in Underground, most of the action is about these two characters trying to get through the cave, and then at the end there's a little bit of gunplay, but most of it's over and done and not a very big deal. Well, it's a big deal, but it's kind of a small part of the comic. And then most of that is wrapped up later in a years later thing in an epilogue. Whereas in Forgetless, you have these very punctuated moments with violence. The first frame, for instance, is a single gunshot, and then there's pages dealing with kind of the outfall of that. And a lot of it's leading up to violence, and a lot of it is this bit more of a realistic, like, if you're going to do this big action, there's preparation, there's kind of coming out of it, and it works very well for that, just because you have these frames, but then everything else plays around it. Versus Mesmo, which is very much about a fight, and everything in the comic is very visually lending and stylistically well done, but for what happens with the violence in the story, there's not much more than the fact that two people are smacking on each other. Then there's the general visual elements, which is kind of hard to just talk about, but I'm going to try here without using any images because I'm not sure how to really do it short of scanning them in, and not really sure about the legality behind that. But the most basic of them is Underground, which actually has a fair amount of stylistic elements compared to most comics, where you have your general out in the day side characters talking, and all that's done in normal color drawing, all that, and then when you have the characters in the cave, it's more of this monochromatic or grayscale. It has a definite feel and look to it, and it's definitely more heavily inked. And it definitely works great to cause a contrast, but also set up a mood for the characters and how they're contrasted from people out in normal society. And because of the way that it's really colorless, it causes you to focus on different details and look at different things, whereas the other panels are usually not too detailed, but have more just background to them. And for that, I think it played off really well. Now in Forgetless, stylistically, it's very interesting. You have a lot of different sort of documents or like Flickr pages. It has a lot of web elements. It uses tweeting as another sort of element which in the comic. And for that, I mean, you have all this multimedia understanding, and that's great, and they play it in really well. And even as a sidebar, to bring you back, they have a little Twitter thing, previous Forgetless, and I forget the exact title, but it's very mediated for that, which is great. And then stylistically, last you have Mesmo, which each page is beautiful, and you have all these layouts, and you can see everything kind of flows together. It has that very dynamic paneling sort of feel, which the others don't. The others are very clearly paneled, and for that, I mean, it's very wonderful. But unlike the other two, that is the complete strength of the comic. It's kind of, I guess, how you'd compare more of an indie film to, say, something like Avatar, where everything is beautiful, but overall the story is stock. And so what I'd like to kind of try to get at is hopefully hear back from you guys about what you think makes a comic, because to me, whereas I'm seeing all these great stylistic elements and all these different ways to play on things and do comics a little differently, which is all great, and all three of those have, I think even though comics are such a visual medium, like anything else that's story driven, you need to have a good script to begin with. A good plot, a good story. I mean, a little bit of characterization, funny little moments aren't going to make up for the fact that nothing really is going on. And I think that's true for any medium, but I mean, doubly so for comics, where you're taking everything at your own pace and little moments. I mean, you can get caught up in, but since you're taking it at your own pace, it can just be the moment, then it's really clear to see that there's not much going on, that there's not much depth behind what all the fluff is about, essentially. Not to say that the visual elements are fluff always, but a lot of times it can just be that. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about what really makes a comic and what's the backbone. More the script level or the visual level.